Developed by Terminist Arcade along with nfoPRINCE and published by Fulqrum, a big thank you to them for providing the review key, Hyperviolent is a retro horror FPS, taking heavy inspiration from the Looking Glass classic System Shock, featuring a similar aesthetic and gameplay infused with light RPG mechanics. You play as a pilot investigating a mining colony that has succumbed to a mysterious virus, driving its residents insane and turning them homicidally violent. To rectify the situation, you must descend through the sprawling floors of this colony, surviving its homicidal residents as well as other beasts with firearms, melee weapons, and explosives. Is Hyperviolent the System Shock throwback we were all hoping for? Well, get comfy, you're about to find out.
In the year 2278, the intrepid Earth Coalition maintains a barbarous grip over the soul mining rights to the rare and highly coveted.
So I'm going to cut right to the chase. I had a pretty negative experience with this game due to a slew of technical and design issues. I actually played the initial early access version of Hyperviolent 2 years back and had a pretty bad time with it then too. There was a boatload of technical issues, specifically crashes and the audio cutting out, forcing a restart, and the game's difficulty was wildly unbalanced, to the point that I was struggling to get through it. I opted to hold off reviewing it until the 1.0 version, largely because there was other content I wanted to get to, but also to see if the game could get its act together. Cut to 2 years later, this last September specifically, and Hyperviolent was about to release its 1.0 version on September 23rd. Fulqrum reached out to me and asked if I would like a review key, and I said, sure, send it over. Now, at the time, I wasn't able to get to the game right away as I had some scheduling conflicts and other content I was finishing, which Fulqrum was fine with. And a little over a week after Hyperviolent's launch, I finally sat down to play it. I got to the 3rd level, I went to go pick up a yellow keycard from a corpse, and this happened. Crash. I rebooted the game, and it crashed again. And again. I then went onto the Steam forums and what do you know, a bunch of other players were having the same issue. Again, this was over a week after its launch. I contacted Fulqrum, said, hey, you guys have a game-breaking bug here, I can't progress. They were very apologetic and said they were working on a patch, but in the meantime, here's a cheat code so you can skip the level. Okie dokie. I skipped the level, and from there, I can't say it got much better. Hey everybody, this is Kirk. Sorry to have to do this, but right when I was putting the final touches on this review, there was an update for Hyperviolent and I need to address it. Sorry if this is messy for the video, but sometimes content creation is just plain messy. So past this point in the review, I go on to the presentation section where I detail a whole bunch of technical issues I experienced with this game. Issues with the graphical settings or lack thereof, issues with the audio mix, but more importantly, I address the litany of crashes and performance issues I experienced, several of which were game-breaking. The plan was always to post this video today, October 16th, but a patch for Hyperviolent dropped yesterday, October 15th, into the beta branch that addressed most of the settings and audio issues I mentioned, but more importantly, the game-breaking crashes, specifically the yellow keycard one I talked about before. This wasn't the first time something like this has happened for one of my reviews, and my first instinct was to delay the video, replay the game to reassess, and then revise the review. However, I decided not to do that, and this is why. In my opinion, this game came out in a broken state. Broken for me, and broken for a swath of other players that purchased it. And it was 22 days, a little over 3 weeks from when it launched into 1.0 before a patch was put out to address these game-breaking issues, which followed 2 years and 5 months specifically, of early access development. Was that not enough time to properly QA test this and ensure it launched in a stable state? I'm sure there were explanations for this, and I have nothing against the developer or the publisher, and I do applaud them for fixing the game. But at the end of the day, the practice of releasing a broken game and then fixing it with patches in the post-launch is an unacceptable one to me, in all spheres of gaming, AA, AAA, and indie, especially with an early access title, chiefly because players already spent money on it, spent money with the promise that the game will come out in a competent, playable state. Hyperviolent failed to do that. Now, I did go back into the game to test out the patch, and indeed the fixes detailed are there, and I'm sure more are coming because I doubt they've gotten to all the problems. But past this point, I'm not altering my review, because that's the experience I had with this game, and that was the experience others had with this game, and I want this review to validate their frustrations. If you'd prefer to take my opinions with a grain of salt because of that, please do. And if you disagree with how I handled this, fair enough, I will keep that in mind for the future when something like this happens again. Once again, sorry for the mess of this, but I just wanted to be honest and transparent. Okay, let's continue. There are definitely cool and good aspects to Hyperviolent, and I will be discussing those. But there is a stream of maddening problems with this game in just about every aspect of it, and I think the best place to start is in its presentation. Now, the presentation is undoubtedly the strongest aspect of Hyperviolent. The best way I can describe it is it's as if you took the original System Shock and ported it to the original PlayStation and/or Nintendo 64. You inhabit a low-poly world of colorful, pixelated hallways decorated with simplistic models and stark, flat lighting, with enemies and your inventory rendered with detailed sprites. It's effective at conveying a retro vibe as well as making you feel like you're in a place that has truly gone to hell, with spooky sights such as walls smeared with blood and piles of dead bodies everywhere, complete with buzzing flies. There are portions where the environment comes across too simplistic and boxy, but overall there is a solid sense of atmosphere conveyed here. The sprite work is the real highlight. The pixel art for enemies is well done, their designs are wonderfully horrific, and their death animations are vibrantly gory and detailed in a way that brings you right back to the 90s. Your weapons and hands are probably the best looking sprites of the game, with the art showing off various shades of color, lighting, and general wear and tear. A nice touch too is that as you upgrade your weapons, you can see it reflected on the sprite art, showing new attachments grafted on and whatnot. I also like the portraits shown in the crew logs, having a lo-fi VHS look, nicely adding to the retro futurism aesthetic of this game. Not to mention there's some nice touches to help the immersion, like being able to wipe blood off your helmet's visor. And I really dug that whenever you access computer terminals, your cursor is your gloved hand. That's a very old school touch that you saw a lot of back in the day. I also enjoyed how the cutscenes were handled, all done in engine with cool camera angles and specialized sprite work that was quite creepy to behold. Sadly, the praise ends there. My first big issue with the presentation is that the graphical settings are pretty bare bones. There are few graphical options you can tweak, which was irksome because there were certain effects I really wanted to turn off. For example, the game has this N64-esque blur to it, which isn't necessarily bad looking, but personally I wanted a more crispy PS1 look that was present in the early access version. But the real offender for me was that there was no way to turn off the aggressive bloom effects. I mean, some of the light sources are so blown out it's borderline retina burning. Anytime I ran into a fluorescent light or a fire, it was an exercise in trying to play the game while wincing. I was hoping the sole option to turn off strobes would do the trick, but alas, no. For whatever reason, the game is locked to 60 frames per second with no option to change it, which is fine, I guess. 60 is my minimum for any game, but for me and others with high refresh monitors, it is a bummer. And bizarrely, the game doesn't have the option to let you play in 1440p resolution, which is my personal preference. It's either 1080p or you're jumping up to 4K. The sound design, while not wholly bad, was completely undercut by a bad audio mix, exacerbated by some annoying sound effects. For instance, many of the monsters make this noise that I would describe as a gorilla making baby noises. And whenever it triggers, it sounds like it's coming from directly in front of your face, regardless of where the enemy is positioned. In fact, it actually overtakes any other sound effects playing, and it gets real annoying real fast. And this was bizarre, but throughout the game you're guided by an AI who was well voiced and presented in the early access version. But for some reason in 1.0 they changed the voice actress. And no offense to her, but the performance isn't great, and it's missing some of the sound design present in the early access version. Here's a comparison.
You have come here to investigate the hailing frequency, I presume. How fortunate. You will find the denizens of this vessel are not well. They're behaving uncharacteristically violent.
You have come here to investigate the hailing frequency, I presume. How fortunate. You will find the denizens of this vessel are not well. They're behaving uncharacteristically violent.
It honestly sounds like a temp track that for whatever reason they went with in the final version. And worse yet, for the majority of the game, the voice is mixed so low you can barely hear it.
Is an ingenious marvel of experimental weaponry developed by the Intrepid Earth Coalition, IEC.
What was really unacceptable, though, was the overall stability in this game. I mentioned earlier the game-breaking crash with the yellow keycard, and I wish I could say that was it. But the rest of the game was permeated with more crashes, some also game-breaking, and a litany of bugs, jank, and performance issues. I remember at one point I had this special ballistic shield in my inventory that whenever I used would immediately crash the game. There was a crash after a major boss fight, and after I rebooted, I went back and beat him again, and while making my way to the end of the level, I suddenly fell through the floor into the void of space, forcing me again to reload a save. And after that particular point, the game got even worse, as if that was the furthest point they had polished it. The crashes became more frequent and performance hitches became more and more common. And at times, the frame rate would dip to as low as the high 20s out of nowhere. Adding insult to injury, there was a late game boss that suddenly disappeared mid-battle. I think he fell through the floor or clipped through the wall and got trapped, something I witnessed happening to other enemies throughout the game. And this soft-locked me from progressing, and once again I had to quit out and reload a save. I really need to emphasize I was experiencing all of this well over a week after the game launched into 1.0, which itself was after 2 years of early access development. Was this properly QA tested? I doubt it. It's unacceptable. If these bugs were present during early access, that's one thing. It's a work in progress by definition. But sorry, this is 1.0. The gloves are off, the product is defective. And look, having bugs and issues like this at launch isn't uncommon, but if that's the case, you get it patched and fixed ASAP, not weeks later. At this point, I wish I could say, well, despite the technical issues, the game itself is fantastic, but that's not the case. For a game that draws so much from the likes of System Shock, it's a pretty by-the-numbers shooter. Pretty much all of it has you going from level to level, with the only real objective being to get to the end. Done so by hunting down keycards and passcodes to unlock a litany of locked doors, and flipping a series of switches. Now that's not a terrible thing. Obviously I've covered a lot of shooters on this channel that are exactly that. But for me, I was hoping for something that was more like System Shock, with immersive sim elements and pseudo-Metroidvania progression. I mean, they tell you on the Steam page that this is an old school FPS, but think more System Shock than Doom. Nope, this is definitely more Doom than System Shock, fellas. Just because you have crew logs and an RPG-esque inventory system doesn't change the fact that 99% of the game is mindlessly killing monsters. To be fair, there are moments of brilliance in the gameplay. For example, in one level, you have doors blocked by a plant growth that you eventually figure out will retract when hit with light. That's an interesting mechanic that I had to figure out, which was satisfying. And in that same level, you have to learn how to mix up a chemical grenade to blow open a wall. Also super cool, but these things don't really come back into play for the rest of the game, at least not in a meaningful way. There's also a brief but enjoyable section towards the end where you pilot a ship in descent-style combat. I thought this was awesome, but sadly it only happens in one level and very briefly. Combat is a dual-handed system where you can hold two guns at the same time, or a gun and a melee weapon, making it easy to shoot at shooters and bash the rushers. It's a fun concept. I mean, who doesn't love a dual wield? But managing it can be a pain. While in gameplay, the way you swap weapons is by scrolling through the inventory with your mouse wheel and then clicking either the left or right mouse button to swap to the corresponding hand. You only have a few seconds to do it before the menu disappears altogether. Don't be surprised if you end up wasting some ammo in the process. And the readability of the inventory icon scrolling isn't great, and if anything, makes the process more confusing. And doing this in mid-battle, like if you suddenly run out of ammo or the weapon breaks, can feel cumbersome to say the least. You can get the hang of it over time, but there wasn't a better way to do this? A weapon wheel system, perhaps? Alternatively, you can equip yourself in the inventory screen, which is easier, but this brings its own irritation. The inventory is a straightforward drag-and-drop system that will be intuitive to most gamers, especially those that play RPGs or immersive sims. My pet peeve with it, though, is that let's say you want to swap one of your weapons. Most players will drag up a new weapon and place it in the inventory slot with the expectation that the previous weapon will auto-sort back into the inventory when you close it, because that's what 99% of inventory systems like this do. Nope. If you don't make sure to place the old weapon back in your inventory after swapping, when you close it, it will discard that weapon at your feet. This may seem like a small thing, but it drove me nuts over time because it accidentally caused me to leave behind weapons early in the game, and it's just an unnecessary step. Now, if my inventory is full, sure, that makes sense to discard it. Otherwise, it's just silly. Fortunately, there's a drop-down menu you can use to make sure this doesn't happen, but come on, the inventory should be quicker and easier than this. And while we're on the inventory, I did discover a fantastic bug. If I selected the repair tool and then immediately closed the inventory, it would drop at my feet, just as I explained before, but when I went back into my inventory, what do you know? It duplicated. And I had quite the time cloning a bunch of repair tools. Did anybody test this game? Sure, duplication bugs can be found in the most polished of titles, but this wasn't hard for me to come across. I'm not sure if there's other items this can happen with, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. In all, though, the combat is pretty mediocre. Most of the enemies will just bum rush you, which is just a matter of backing up and holding down the melee attack until they're dead. Not a whole lot of challenge or nuance to it. And while the guns do feel good to fire, the lack of damage animations or strong indications that your bullets are actually landing makes the shooting feel soft and unresponsive. I opted to do my first playthrough on the normal difficulty, which I regret because it was way too easy. By the end of the game, I had around 50 health vials, tons of ammo, and a boatload of powerful weapons, which I often felt were unnecessary because I found if I stuck with an upgraded energy weapon, which there's a lot of ammo for lying around, along with a melee weapon, I could take on pretty much anything the game threw at me with ease. And yeah, it made most of the experience real boring. I only died a handful of times, and mostly towards the end of the game due to rocket-firing enemies that can one-shot you. I did go back and play some levels on the brutal difficulty, and indeed it was spicier, but it only highlighted for me how irritating the gun-toting enemies are. Despite them being stationary, they can shoot at you with quick-draw desperado speeds and have hit-scanning or near-hit-scanning precision, which means you'll open a door or step into an area and be immediately lit up before you know what's going on. Made more irritating by the fact that when you take damage, your screen smears with blood, obscuring your view. Why do developers keep doing this? It was annoying when Call of Duty started doing it years ago, it's still annoying now. Now, in all fairness, there were plenty of times when the gunners had to pause before they started firing at me. However, that didn't really ease the frustration because your character moves so slow, even if you take evasive maneuvers, you're still gonna get hit, forced to run for cover, and it's just not that fun. I would have played more on brutal difficulty, but I'm gonna be honest with you guys. By that point, I was so exhausted with this game and its technical headaches, I just couldn't do it anymore. Difficulty is different for everyone, so maybe take what I said with a grain of salt, but for experienced FPS players that decide to play this, just go straight to brutal. To this game's credit though, it does feature one extremely cool weapon, the Neural Tether, which allows you to take over enemies, keeping you from harm. I loved this. It reminded me of possessing enemies in the GameCube cult classic Geist. Nintendo should bring that back. It's a real shame there weren't more inventive mechanics like this featured in the game. The downside to it though, or perhaps in my case, the upside, is a glaring bug where if you take over a particularly difficult enemy in the medical level, it duplicates them. So when you gain control, you're immediately fighting your clone, which 100% of the time resulted in both of them dying. This bug was so consistent, it became my go-to strategy for defeating these otherwise tough enemies. Again, did anybody test this game? Hyperviolent is a mess. It's not the worst thing I've ever played, and there are good aspects to it that hint at a stronger game. But it's hobbled by game-breaking bugs and other technical issues, which after years of early access is inexcusable. Not to mention its mediocre combat and overly forgiving difficulty that undercuts any sort of tension or fun it was going for. Perhaps Hyperviolent will be in a better state someday, but for now I can't recommend this game. If you're looking for something akin to classic System Shock, I would personally recommend Sonar Shock from Raphael Bosniak, a tongue-in-cheek tribute to it that does a decent job recreating its gameplay, warts and all. And, well, you can't beat the original System Shock, which despite the old school learning curve is an all-time classic in my book. The remake is good too. But that's it for me. What are your thoughts on Hyperviolent? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, subscribe, share, and smack that bell. It's a huge help for the algorithm and getting my videos seen by more people. If you want to join my Discord, the link is down below, along with my affiliate links. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.